Welcome to Full Throttle Talk, the podcast where horsepower meets conversation. From supercars to classic legends, high revving tech to motorsport mayhem, we cover it all. Straight from the driver's seat, whether you're a gearhead or racer or just love the thrill of the open road, you're in the right place. Buckle up, hit the gas, and let's go full throttle into today's episode. Welcome back. It's Full Throttle Talk, your weekly favorite podcast with all your automotive news, all your automotive facts, auction results, all kinds of fun things we're going to share with you guys today. And as always, welcome back, Paul and Greg. You guys ready to rumble?
Let's do it.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So there's been a lot happening the past week, a lot of new, I would say, very exciting news coming out from the auction fronts. Just everywhere I turned, everywhere I looked on Instagram, everywhere else, I was running into people talking about cars, all kinds of excitement coming out. So, Greg, top of your head, what's the coolest thing that happened since the last Full Throttle Talk podcast about a week ago in your mind? Like, what stands out? What's the blinking light that you have to share?
Well, this is not national news blinking light, but this is a really crazy situation I experienced. I went to go see a potential client who has a lot of really cool cars, like 8 split window Corvettes, like some really crazy stuff. And I hadn't seen him maybe in 4 months or so, 5 months or so. And anyways, I'm like, hey, how's it going? He's like, I'm doing much better. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, I was dead for 45 minutes. And so this guy, I don't know, 3 months ago or so, maybe 4 months ago, he had a heart attack, fell dead on the floor in front of his wife. And his wife didn't know how to do CPR. She called 911. They walked her through CPR. 3 paramedics came. After 30 minutes, 2 paramedics gave up working on him. And 1 continued to work on him and got a pulse. And so he had to get some surgery, some heart surgery. And when they were in there, they noticed a tumor. And they said, once your heart's a little better, you need to get the tumor checked out. And they said, in the next 70 days, you'll probably have some other type of episode, so be prepared. And so 160 days later, he goes, sees he's fine. He hasn't had no brain damage, no issues. You walk up to him, you never know this happened. He went to the oncologist and the tumor was gone. Like they had a picture of it. They had a picture of it and the tumor's gone. And so that's not necessarily breaking car news, but it's something that kind of really shook up my week. And he's doing great.
So this is a friend of yours, or was he talking to you after having all these bad health experiences? Well, it turned out to be good health experiences and decided to unload some of his cars. What's the timeline?
Not
here?
necessarily unloading any of the cars yet, but it was a visit to kind of see how things are going and if he needed my help or whatever. We're talking about a couple of different things, but it was just a shocking 15-minute conversation because you would never know it talking to the guy that he was dead for 45 minutes. Just crazy.
Yeah, that's extraordinary.
Crazy.
Well, God bless him, and thank God he's okay.
He's like, I'm here for a reason. I got to figure out what it is.
Maybe to buy more split window coupes.
Maybe. So
Paul,
that was the craziest thing.
What's the coolest thing that happened since our last visit? We've been watching you on Instagram and all your amazing travel pictures. I mean, I could talk to you for hours straight about the videos I've been seeing about the Texas Hill Country Rally and all these other things you've been doing. I showed Julie the picture of you guys rallying through snow and all kinds of horrible conditions. And I came to I came to a conclusion that I'm going to share with everyone right now. There's no way in hell I'm going to do that. It looked too sketchy. It looked too many places to break. Too many places to break down.
That's true, but we were with a group of 11 cars. So for those who do know me, every year for this is my 7th year, do the Hill Country Rally, which is, on paper, it sounds so nerdy, and it's something I would never do, but it's one of my favorite events. It is for, get this, Greg, air-cooled Porsches, torsion bar only, which is basically 89 and older, no transaxles, no 944s, no 964s, no 993s. So 356s, 914s, and 911 early ones and Carreras in SCs and things like that. And they meet in Kerrville, Texas, which is sort of the heart of Hill Country. And fun fact, it was the best place to see the solar eclipse last year. And they had a hotel where over 400 of these cars came together from I think it was like 40 states and like 10 countries. It's crazy, and it's great driving. But the reason we do it is the adventure getting there, like Tim mentioned, is always full of surprises. I mean, literally, we're watching weather and road conditions the day before, and that road you talked about, which I posted, was on the second day. You know, it's if you just drive straight from Southern California out to Kerrville, it's I think 1,200 miles. We took almost a 1,700-mile route, which was basically after we got to Arizona, we were not on the 10 pretty much the rest of the way, going up through Prescott. And there's a road called 191. If you look it up, it used to be Highway 66, US Highway 666, believe it or not. And it was called Devil's Highway. For that reason, there was all kinds of, anytime there was an incident, it was always blamed on the fact that it's the Devil's Highway. So finally, in the early 90s, and it wasn't even because of that they changed it. It was because all the signs were getting stolen. So they changed it to US Highway 191. And I would say 50% of the time we get to take that road. We were watching weather. It is an unmaintained road usually, but you'll see in my video, we actually got behind a snowplow. And that was our backup plan. We're like, okay, if we keep going further and we get screwed, we are going to basically wait for the snowplow and we'll just go behind him. It was snow. It was icy. And the best part, my friend Mike Nesdale, he listens to our podcast. He's in a 912. He knows I love to poke fun at 912s. I love the people. I just can't get on board with the cars. And whenever 912 guys are so proud of their cars, and they will always come back and tell you that the weight balance is better. They handle better than a 911. I just think they sound horrible. And that's just me. Which is weird. I like a 356, the way it sounds. So as we're going up one of the hills, he's a fairly conservative guy. He drives really, within his headspace. I love driving with him. I watch him do the biggest slow motion tank slapper where he slides to the left, slides to the right. He does that like 2 to 3 times on each side. And my dad and I wish I would have videoed it. My dad and I are just like each time like going, ooh, like he's ready to loop it. And once he gets going straight, we're using radios and I go, Mike, I didn't have my camera on. Could you do that again? And he's like, no way in hell. And then I come back on and I go, by the way, I thought these 912s were supposed to handle better than a 911. And we didn't hear anything else from him the rest of that. It's a 95-mile road. And I call it a 95-mile autocross because there's probably, 500 turns. I mean, it just is. And it dumps you out in the largest copper mine in the world, which if you haven't driven through a large mine, it's insane. I mean, those dump trucks that look like the size of a McMansion, just cruising everywhere. And all the vehicles around there have these 10-foot poles on the back with flags because I guess the dump trucks can't see where they're going and they frequently dump loads on top of these trucks. I mean, it's
Wow.
nuts. But anyway, it is always an adventure going there. It's blast being there with all the people. They are truly some of the most welcoming, down-to-earth people. The only thing that sucks is on the way back, we just power back in a day and a half. And by the way, just because I didn't get enough of 3,500 miles, I leave tomorrow on the Driving While Awesome rally up in Monterey in my 944. So
you're telling me that
mileage.
That's
a
what I was
lot of
just
mileage.
thinking, Greg. Greg's reading my mind. So that was 3,500 miles in it was a 66 911, right? A Safari?
No, it's my 86 back date. It's an 86 911. It looks like a early 70s 911. It's backdated in the early 90s. The car has we almost hit 370,000 miles and the motor's never been open.
Oh my
We
gosh.
are not kind to it. I mean, we drive in dirt, snow. We service the crap out of it. And I always drive, I watch the, oil temp I'm adding. And by the way, in 3,500 miles, 7 quarts of oil we burn through. So
That's incredible. Well,
it's like
that's
an oil
just
change.
I feel like a 400-mile rally is quaint, perfect, relaxing. 3,600 miles, whatever, just doesn't sound like a lot of fun.
It is. It is. The thing is, I see so many of these people buy these really cool special cars, and they're hard to make them relevant just driving around, especially a metropolis, like Los Angeles. Okay, you drive it on Sunday. PCH, but when you go do a multi-day event, whatever's comfortable, yeah, there's some that are just 400 miles, some that are very high end that, like Road and Track puts on, and, there's the Copper State, things like that. You just find one that fits what you want to do. And then all of a sudden, owning these vintage cars becomes relevant. And we've talked about it before. What drives a lot of the purchase of these cars is events that they qualify for. And I think, Greg, wasn't RM now going to be involved with the Brighton to England?
Yes. Yeah.
Which
like
is
a 5-year sponsorship. And to your point, let's talk about Ferrari GTOs for a second. One of the big draws to that car versus a short wheelbase or a Testarossa is that there's the GTO club, right? And there's a rally once every 5 years that is one of the most awesome exclusive clubs to be a part of. Yes, you have to buy your way into it, but you have the Alpha 8C club, you have the McLaren F1 club where they do a rally, I think this coming year, and then the GTO. And so, if you ask why is a Testarossa, there is a price difference, which is amazing based on the rally. There's only 3 275 GTB competition cars, the C's, there's only 3 of those. They're the evolution of the GTO. I've been trying to help someone privately, which I think is impossible. But one of the buyers is like, well, does it qualify for the GTO rally? I'm like, it doesn't. It's not a GTO.
Well, talk about that, Greg. I don't know anything about this. Like I mean, you're dropping a lot of really, gold here. If I had what does one of these rallies cost? Where do they rally? What's the whole experience? What do you know?
I don't know a ton. I know the last GTO rally went through like Tennessee and North Carolina. It was at the exclusive estates. There was, I think, 22 GTOs on it. So it's a pretty big deal. I mean, there's only, including the 3 prototype cars, there's only 39 total, probably 36 exist, 36 original 250 GTOs. So you're looking at 20 to 22 of those coming into one spot. And obviously they don't announce it, but can you imagine being like nowhere, Tennessee, and just seeing these GTOs roll by? And it's once every 5 years. Canosa puts it on. They do the Cavallino down in Florida, the big Ferrari show. But I know like the McLaren F1, they do a rally. I think it's every other year, every 3 years or so. And one's happening this year somewhere. But people will ship their F1s all around the world just to do this rally. And it really is. It comes down to being a club is what it comes down to.
My friend, my friend of mine locally, collector, has a pre-war Bentley. He's really got, he's got a huge collection, but he's really gotten into the pre-war Bentley. And the primary reason is because it's a super active rally club. And his car's right now next door at our upholstery shop getting the tonneau cover fixed, because then the car's getting shipped to Tennessee for a pre-war Bentley rally. And there's going to be, I don't know, 30 or 40 of these pre-war Bentleys. And they're very specific. It's got to be, before 1930, after 19 whatever. But yeah, I think that drives a lot of the purchase. And I try to get my clients and friends, like, go drive your cars, even if it's come up on the mountains on Friday. Then you start to realize why we own these cars. Often these people just park them, they look at them, they're great, but that only goes so far. And then driving them on the street, especially in Southern California, is not great.
Well, let's talk about what that, but I'm just genuinely curious, Greg. What's the rally experience like? I see a lot of driving. If I'm driving a $75 million GTO, I'm seeing a lot of maybe, thinking about this is a $75 million GTO. Now, granted, I'm a billionaire, so I don't care that much, but I do care. So I'm feeling a lot of worry. But so what's the experience like? I mean, even if you're going on a normal, I've done rallies before, but not like what you guys are describing.
I don't know, honestly. I just know the one place, if I think of the name, I'll come up with it, but it's like Blackberry Farm or something in Tennessee that is apparently very, very nice, very somewhat high end, obviously. So I don't know like what their itinerary was, that kind of stuff. I just know that it's something that people really desire to be a part of. I think if I had to guess, I thought it was 50 grand to do it. And I won't say who or when or why, but the situation, a friend of mine did it because the owner of the car was unable to do it, and there was no refund. So he's like, you go do it. And I'm like, all right. So
Wow.
I don't know the specifics about it. And Tim, you're used to asking us questions with no prep. So let me ask a question with no prep. Why don't you and I'll start. Tell me your favorite tell me your ideal car to own to rally and why. So mine, I'll go first. I want to get a Mercedes SLS, the Going, not the Roadster, because that car, I don't think the Mercedes will ever make another Going. So this is the modern interpretation of a Going, but that car was accepted into the historic Going rally. And I think that adds a lot to the value of the SLS. I don't think people realize that at this point because they're kind of flat right now, but I would love to have one of those Mercedes SLS Going cars. Black Series would be great, but those are $800,000. You could get an SLS for 200 grand to 250, depending on mileage. So that would be my pick.
That is awesome. I didn't know that. That's a whole bunch of interesting in one little snippet.
All right.
Did you know?
So what's
Yeah.
your pick,
So
or what's Paul's pick?
Paul's thinking. So
What's
so we're talking about like any kind of, give me more parameters. You're saying just to go on a rally?
Like, yeah. What is your rally car and why? Like mine is so that it could go on a particular rally, the Going rally. And also I think from a valuation standpoint, I think that also makes those cars more valuable in the long term. I think that's a really sweet spot. I don't care for the look of that car too much. I think the hood's too long, but I think that's a really sweet car to get for numerous reasons.
I mean, is this the more recent Going?
Yeah.
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 I mean, I think rallies have to be done in a vintage car. And I think when you're traveling with a group of vintage cars, you know, like the classic Mille Miglia, which I think is a bit too focused on the driving. I think the key is great roads, beautiful venues, like cars, and you want to stop a lot. You know, it's not just like time distance. None of the rallies I do are competitive. They're really, rally's probably a poor word. I would call it a tour. And when you're touring with other people in similar cars, and that's why you'll see a lot of these rallies have a year limit, or there'll be a certain mark. They're usually all age limited. And, you know, I prefer doing, you know, the California Mille, I think it's 58 or 57 and older, and then they allow some continuation, like some Gull Wings. There are some minor continuations where you can get into the early 60s. The Copper State, I want to say, is like early 70s and older, maybe mid 70s. We're starting to see these rally groups push the age up even into the 80s now, depending on the car, because I think they want to attract younger, newer people to the environment. Colorado Grand, I want to say, is similar to California Mille. And by the way, Tim, those three rallies, they're all inclusive, and they're probably $15,000. Then you have something like Road and Track. You know, Matt Farrell will be on next week. He's one who puts on that rally for Road and Track. I think it's all inclusive, $15,000, and they allow pretty much everything. Like there'll be new Bentleys, you know, newer cars. It's just really about driving. But when you go in a group that has similar cars and similar kind of enthusiasm and the kind of driving on great roads, that's what makes it really fun. So like I'm leaving tomorrow on the DWA rally, and it's 99 and older. And I think there's going to be a lot of 80s and 90s BMWs, Porsches, Alpha, you know, 70s Alphas. I would guess that most of the cars will be under 250 horsepower. We're going to be on isolated Central California roads. We're staying not at bougie places, you know, Best Westerns, but it's just this communal fun event. And we hang out in the parking lot. It's sort of like, Tim, the best way to describe it is a rolling cars and coffee with bitchin' roads in between. And we'll stop at different places, gather up, hang out, just shoot the shit, and then go drive another road. And if you've done track days, it's a lot of that kind of vibe, that camaraderie. And I literally replaced doing club racing with these rallies because I got a lot of the same feeling without the frustration and heartbreak of a car not working. I mean, I've had cars not run great, and you can kind of limp along a rally and have just as much fun.
So I had a question from a listener. We're going to do things slightly out of order, but you're causing me to think of all this. And this guy was actually a listener, but let me try to find it to my Instagram profile. But he and I actually met. We met at the gym. And so he was wearing a Porsche hat. So of course I have to chat him up, and he had a 911 ST and all these other things. Let me find his question. And he sent a really great question. But while I'm looking for this, he and I had a fun chat about what it is that you really like, or why it is that what is it about driving a vintage car? And I got to really thinking about it. When you're driving something that you are relatively confident it isn't going to break, and you're essentially you're the smallest thing on the road no matter what you're driving, you have to have such a state of presence that you don't normally experience outside of when you hear, like when I hear people talk about meditating and whatnot, where they're trying to block out all these exterior noises and influences. And so I just got to sort of pondering, what is it that's so seductive about going on drives, especially in vintage cars? And it really is the combination of things that are forcing you to be present. And if you're not, well, you could end up in a ditch, or you could have, not hearing something that's about to break, all those types of things. Greg, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what is the essence of driving that people love so much?
It just transports you back in time, really is what it is. And I don't have as much experience in an old vintage car. I've done very few rallies. I've done a couple local ones. I did do a rally last year, vintage rallies. Rich and Gene Taylor out of New England, they do a fantastic job. And per what Paul said, it's really about the community of the people that get together and hang out together and have a good time. And I was in not quite vintage, but I was in a 1990 RX-7 convertible that the Rich let me put 1,000 miles on. And, that's the pop-up headlights, total 90s. I got so many, young kids coming up to me during, a gas break or whatever that were in love with that car. And I would just imagine that would be the same, when you're in a vintage car and you're in a rally and you look at the cars in front of you and you look at the cars behind you as you're on this rally. That's one of the parts I enjoy the most. You come to a stop and you hear the car in front of you take off and you see it behind you. And it's like a rolling parade. And especially in a vintage car, I've done one in my Mustang, but it was not that long, but it just transports you back in the time. I'm not as secure in the reliability of my really old cars to do something. I'm getting there slowly. I'm just not as comfortable doing whatever, Paul, 3,600 miles in my 65 Mustang. It's just not built for that, unfortunately, but I would like to get there.
Yeah. There's people who do it in these cars. I've done on my green, backdate 911 called La Tortuga. I've done 200,000 miles in the last 11 years of vintage rallies primarily. And knock on wood, I've never ended up on a tow truck. I've got it. If you looked at my trunk, it is stuffed with parts. Whenever someone else breaks on a rally, I find out what broke if they have the same car, and I go buy that part. And so I've got this collection of parts and tools. Now, I can drive. I cannot fix anything. I don't want to fix anything. I don't find it pleasurable. I just don't know how to do it. So inevitably, there's someone in our group who sees me floundering, and they come over, and so long as I have the right parts, and they're usually pretty impressed that I have the right tools, the right parts, the right fittings. And only a few times we've had to do that, and you get back on the road. And by the way, that kind of stranded part, it sounds horrible. It kind of adds to the adventure, and it's the things that you do remember. And we've seen some crazy stuff along the ways. But, like you said, Greg, it's a combination of being transported to a different era. And like what you said, Tim, what I found in track events, no matter how much crap is going on in your life, when you're on a track, it just immediately pushes all the noise out. You cannot do anything. I mean, you don't even remember you breathing, blinking. You have to kind of force yourself to release your grip on the steering wheel. I mean, you just become hyper focused. And when you're driving a vintage car, it's really hard to do, especially on a twisty road, anything else but just drive. And so you get all of these sensations, the sound, the smell, the focus. And when you are in an old car and you hit a few turns just right, and you could feel the car doing what it was designed to do, it just clicks, and it becomes addictive. And then you stop, and you literally are just on endorphins and on a high from it. And then you get to hang out with your friends for 3 or 4 days. And then there's some of us that do even longer rallies. In April, we're doing a 10-day rally along the Lost Coast. And so basically all I do is work so I can go drive. And
It's like you do work, right? You do work.
Well, those friends also buy cars from him too, so gotta
Oh, there
keep
you
this
go.
in mind. Yeah, exactly. All right, so this is a great question. This came from Matt Saxton in Dallas. So, hey, Matt, I told you I'd ask. I'm going to ask. I'm going to read it as he wrote it. And this was in an Instagram direct message. So if it's not written perfectly, uh, accurately, then don't worry about it. Always fun to pose a question of why so many buyers chase the newest, greatest release from a manufacturer when there are so many greats out there. Cars that have fully depreciated, lower cost of entry with little downside. Porsche is a great example. And by the way, he doesn't just like Porsches. I looked at his Instagram, and his Instagram is Saxon Garage because he had a lot of really cool American stuff too. The 997 is my personal favorite, and it's half to 75% less than a 992. Take the Turbo S, for example. A 997 low miles Turbo S is $80,000 to $100,000. The newest Turbo S is $280,000. Throw a Porsche Classic radio in the 997 and have all the creature comforts of a new car and still have gobs of power. Throw a Cobb tune on the any 997 Turbo and your face will peel back from acceleration. 458 Speciale is another example. For Claude, it's great, but it's not 3x the price of a low mileage 458. No, absolutely not. You guys got what he meant. Look at the F8 compared to the 296. Last V8, 710 horsepower, non-hybrid, 250 grand, gets you one with low miles. I don't think that's accurate, Matt. I don't think 250 grand gets you an F8. Greg, could you do a quick search on that? I don't think
Yeah.
that's accurate. I think an F8 entry price is in the high threes. But oh no, sorry, you don't need to. A 350,000 gets you a brand new one. Long term, one can for sure bet the F8 wins. I think most buyers just don't know or are ill advised, and he's asking for us to banter on that very topic. What do you guys think?
I 120% agree with Matt. But I know why. The reason is your phrase, Tim, the flex. People want the newest, greatest. They want to show their friends they got the ST before everybody else. You do have the collectors that obviously, it's rigged somewhat. You got to buy this to get that. Well, then I'm going to get that as soon as I can get that. So I think so much of it is I want the newest, best, greatest, iPhone, whereas you've ripped me many times. I got one of the oldest, crappiest iPhones. So I would do what he suggests. I'd have the older car, and do some subtle upgrades as needed. And, for a much cheaper price and just enjoy the heck out of it. So I'm on board with Matt.
Yeah, so I agree with you so far, but I'm curious. Well, Greg's in the classic car business, so I'm sure he's not going to say buy new stuff. Old stuff sucks.
Yeah. And I agree with Greg also. And I think Matt is right. I look at, the ROI of fun. And I find that in the
Ooh, I like
Porsche
that.
world, they just sort of have this, 911s, if they have a G on the back end, they would depreciate, as a car for like typically 5 to 7 years. If it doesn't have a G, it kind of depreciates to 10 years. And then after those periods, the only thing that changes value are miles and condition. And if you buy something with over 100,000 miles, then all it is condition, which is just and most of my cars have over 100,000 miles. So I always find that a 15 to 20-year-old Porsche that's higher miles but well cared for and they're out there are incredible values. And I've driven crazy low mileage versions and 150,000 mile versions. And you can't tell a difference. Perfect example, we sold to Magnus Walker a few years ago a client's 991.1 Turbo S. One owner, silver, red, black interior, had 160,000 miles when I sold it, which was
What year is
nuts.
this?
I sold it to Magnus in 2022, maybe
No. What year is the car?
14.
Wow, that's
So
awesome.
so it was a 9-year-old car, not a G on the back end. So it depreciated. It was well under $100,000. It was a $200,000 MSRP car new. The one owner took great care of it. He literally treated it as his daily driver, and he had a long commute, and that's all it was. He serviced at the dealer. He replaced the PDK transmission for 22 grand at like 140,000 miles. When Magnus bought it, he's now put another 30,000 miles on it. It probably hasn't changed in value. It looks great. And and I remember when I sold that car, we sold a couple months later a 14 or 15 Turbo S with under 20,000 miles. Indistinguishable driving difference. They drove
Hmm.
the same. And it wasn't just like I drove in traffic. I drove it up to the mountains, back roads, and it drove great. So the point being is I think there's a value if you want the experience and you don't want to be sort of tethered to this odometer and original paint and all these other things that turn a purchase into almost a lease where you're afraid to overuse it. And so I find that, if you want to experience something modern, 10 to 20 years, you get a lot of the way there. And I think it's even a little more fun. And then when you go to the vintage stuff, you're talking 40 years old and older, especially when you go to something with a 5-digit odometer where the odometer really doesn't matter. I mean, like if you go before 1981 and a 5-digit odometer doesn't matter. There's no Carfax. And now you're buying something that really the value is tied up into how good a condition it is and how it stays there. And you can go have fun with it and put 30,000 miles on it in 5 years, do rallies, do events. Maybe you got to repaint it. Maybe you got to rebuild a motor, but it will very rarely lose much money. And that's really when you look at the cars I own and enjoy, they're not expensive cars, but they all sort of fit that because for me, this is where the value is for me is how much fun can I have and not be freaked out and worried that if I take it on a rally and a rock hits it or I damage it, oh my gosh, my investment, which my least favorite word in the car hobby.
Does ruin the fun. It's fascinating too. Like the 308 you have over your shoulder. I think it's the GTS
308,
inject.
yeah,
Yeah,
79
yeah,
GTS,
yeah. So that's injected, right? That's an I, a
carbureted.
carbureted. Okay. So if you drive a car like that, anything that's vintage, the word steering feel has a completely different connotation than if you're driving a modern car. And you don't know that until you've driven like the new 911 ST, let's say, for example, the new 911 GT3. We had a GT3 Touring, 992 GT3 Touring, and people just talk endlessly about the steering feel. And then you go drive a car that's from the 80s. And like, I don't think people know what the word steering feel really means until you've actually compared the two. And so getting back to the fact that driving, has become this way for me, somewhat hypnotic and meditative, if you want to even sound a little bit woo-woo. But when you feel steering feels when you feel the steering wheel actually undulating and moving to every little, everything in the road, little pebbles and all the rest of it. But if you put somebody who's never experienced before and they have that experience, a modern, say, more flex focused buyer, they're just going to probably dislike the steering feel. They're not going to like real steering feel. So I think maybe you come to the realization after you've had enough of the new cars what you really, really, truly want. And some people do just want the garage art. Some people do just want to show up at Cars and Coffee and have the biggest, baddest, whatever, and that gives them their little sugar high. But if you really meander into what I think we're three of us are focused on, which is truly enjoying the cars for what they were originally meant to be, then it starts becoming something more refined, right? You start knowing exactly what you like. It's just like that Ferrari behind you. The pedals are offset to the right, I mean, so you're always going to be moving your butt a little bit. And if you're much taller than me, you're not going to really fit in a car like that. But that's part of the experience that makes it really special. That's just when I hear people talk about these modern cars and they're so big. I mean, my God, we have a 72 911 and you parked it next to the Touring. The Touring looks like a freaking school bus. It was extraordinary how big modern cars have gotten. Even our little 718 Spider RS, you park it next to a vintage car. It doesn't even make sense why cars. Hey, do you guys have ever studied that or ever read anything about why cars have gotten so bigger? People say it's safety equipment, but I've read something a long time ago that there's another reason. Like when you go to Europe, cars are smaller. So why is it that Americans like bigger cars? You guys ever read about this or have any theories?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was a lot of the cars were designed out of Detroit, and the roads there kind of catered to it. Crappy roads. They wanted soft suspension. It was really about just transporting in comfort, and the roads were wide. We have wide interstates. We have land, and yeah, I think that basically the culture and the landscape determine the vehicles we have. And then as I think as things, escalated, people wanted a bigger car, safety, they want to ride higher. You add safety equipment, A pillars, B pillars, C pillars, all got giant thick. Then you had pedestrian safety standards, 5 mile an hour bumpers, just I think it's a combination of everything: culture, safety laws, road conditions. And then next thing when I'm driving an old 911, I feel like I'm driving through New York City in a canyon of moving, skyscrapers. And you become hyper aware, like literally trying to plan transit to go to a rally in a vintage car. I'm doing everything to avoid driving in traffic because it is so exhausting, because your head's on a swivel and that no one's, I mean, it cracks me up. I see their mirrors light up because they got these modern sensors that tell you there's a car there. And I could see it flashing red from my position. And they still come over, and you're like constantly looking for an exit strategy. How can I go on the shoulder? Where can I slam the brakes on? And you got to remember, when you slam the brakes on, you don't have ABS. So it's like, I fear when I have to go through LA to get to the fun and what I might endure. And that to me is the part that's agitating. And I wish I could just transport my car to the empty road and then go drive.
Yeah, that makes sense. Greg, have you heard any theories about why cars are so big in the United States?
Not beyond us just being so big in the United States.
Well,
I do have a picture from when I had a 66 Mustang convertible next to a first gen Prius. And I took the picture because I was shocked how much bigger the Prius was than the first gen Mustang. The first gen Mustang is a tiny, tiny thing. So you just don't think about it until you see it up against a modern car.
So here's the when I was I don't remember where I read this, but the gist of it is that Americans don't like small cars because they associate small cars with cheap. That's why. And so so Americans think that bigger is more prestigious. People think that, bigger cars, blah, 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 blah. And so it's not like, again, go to Europe and you're going to see lots of little dinky cars that have all the same safety stuff that these big whales have that we drive around. But you guys also said it right too. It's like, why does everyone drive an SUV? It's because you're in a theater and the person in the front row stands up. And so in order for you to actually see what's going on stage, you have to stand up, and the people behind you have to stand up and stand up, stand up, and stand up. And the next thing you know, everyone's basically driving a stupid SUV. Though I did read something fun. Someone's theorizing that Porsche is going to come out with a like a hot hatch. Wouldn't that be amazing? They could, but in any event, so yeah, it's fascinating. Greg, I'm curious, from auction news, anything going on that really caused you to say, wow, that's incredible? Any trends? And let me add a little color to it too, because from the real estate perspective, which is what Julie and I do for a living, we don't sell real estate, but anyway, we're seeing that this has been the worst start to the residential real estate market in like maybe, I think, what did I read? 2013. There's fewer houses selling and fewer pendings happening. And basically, if the crappy market continues, if the pendings and the closings don't increase by May, it's pretty much going to be the worst year for residential real estate sales ever. That's what it's teeing itself up to, unless there's a meaningful pivot, right? That's all your eyes get big. So what does that mean? It means there'll probably be a lot less money flowing to, like, I think every big automotive influencer nowadays made their money in real estate. Most millionaires in the United States make their money in real estate. That's primarily where most people, build wealth. And so if that is going to be taking a back seat for, 2025, I'm curious, are you seeing any side effects from what I'm theorizing?
So tell me why. What's the factors that are impacting it that way?
Lack of inventory. People say interest rates, but primarily it's lack of inventory, not enough homes to buy. And that, again, everyone talks about interest rates, and interest rates definitely play a factor in it. People are talking about lack of affordability, and that this is the worst affordability that there ever has been. So I'm conceding to those points, but the real reason is the lack of inventory combined with the payments. So it's not the prices of homes. A lot of people are saying homes have to, depreciate for the things to be right sized and the market to be healthy again. What has to happen is going to happen is there's going to have to be new construction in the amount of 4 to 5 million new homes. And those are going to be happening in areas right now where you're going to see a lot of benefits from the tariffs that are going to start sneaking in. Manufacturing facilities, towns that are just, you don't even know about are going to become boom towns. All these things, but it's going to take a long time. So we're right now lacking 4 to 5 million homes for sale. That's what the new construction is going to cure over a long period of time. But really, the essence of the problem is monthly payments. And until monthly payments, like nobody cares in general what they pay for something. They care what their monthly payment is. The housing right now, the ratio between what people earn and what they can afford is usually like 3 to 1. So if you earn $1, you can afford a house that costs $3, that kind of thing. And now for the most part in the country, it's 5 to 6x of what people earn. So if you earn 75,000 and the average house now in your market is 500,000, well, you're probably not going to be able to afford it. So what needs to happen is the payments need to drop. And there's a lot of reasons to believe that that's going to be taking place, but I don't want to make this a real estate podcast. But the real fear is, and this is, again, I'd love for you guys to talk, prove me wrong on this, but I think that the real problem right now is the rising interest rates. And that's the reason you've seen a lot of depreciation in the modern cars. That's the reason you're seeing Ferraris drop in price. That's the reason you're seeing all this sort of pain that we've never experienced before, especially in the modern classic market, aside from Porsche GT cars. What is it, Greg? You saw this in the last cycle of the auctions in the beginning of this year. The highest selling cars were freaking Porsches. It's incredible. And Ferraris are now sort of taking a backseat to Porsches. This is an aside, but yeah. So until interest rates fall, and people are saying, well, people don't finance their cars. No, they don't, but they do finance against, say, their portfolio loans, or they finance against a commercial loan. They borrow most people are not spending $400,000, $500,000 with cash, not true cash. They're going to put that cash to work for them so it can make money in the S&P 500 at 10.3%, and they're going to borrow against that type of thing. So if interest rates are increasing or they're not falling, I cannot see how that's not going to have a detrimental effect on the car market, but it hasn't so far in a meaningful way, other than what I talked about. I mean, Ferraris have never depreciated like they are now. I mean, they just haven't. It's staggering. Go ahead.
No, yeah. So I was curious about what's driving that, because I think in the collector car market, I think we started off the year well. I think January basically, and then once all the craziness coming out of DC right now made people very nervous in the car world, I feel. And so you saw that down in Amelia. We had some stuff that was selling soft. Moto Miami was pretty good. I mean, the stuff Thursday night was once in a lifetime, so you can't really count that, because that stuff was going to sell strong no matter what. It seemed like, when you get down below some of the blue chip stuff, there's a level of nervousness out there. Money's not flowing like it was, just weeks prior, honestly. And in Amelia, it just seems like I did make it to the Gooding tent. It just seemed to be kind of quiet. It wasn't a lot of activity. I wasn't at the Broad Arrow auction. I heard there was good energy in the room and such, but some of the numbers were really soft. I pulled a couple things that really surprised me. The one that surprised me is a '89 Mercedes AMG. So this is a V8 6-liter Hammer, the one of approximately 25. I see Paul nodding there, Tim's nodding there. So this is the next gen collector, and you could say that this is the next gen blue chip car, right? And it's the only one apparently that had a manual. The estimate was $1.5 to $2 million for a 1989 Mercedes, and it hammered for $600,000. So it hammered for less than half of the low estimate, a third of the mid estimate, which that one really surprised me quite a bit. Now you can make the argument that estimate was way too high to begin with, but I'm not an AMG expert. The other one that was very surprising for everybody, and it was kind of the scuttlebutt on Amelia Island later that day, they had a 1954 Jaguar D-Type, one of the factory race cars. Now the estimate on this one was $6.5 to $8.5 million, and it hammered at 3.9. So that one, I had dinner later that night with someone who tried to broker that car privately like 3 years ago, offer in hand of 7.3, and it was turned down, and then it hammers for 3.9. And so that's a situation where, it should have brought more. That could have been where just the right people weren't in the room. Could have been.
Did it sell? Greg, did it actually sell?
Yeah, wow. It was no reserve. Yeah. Ooh. And that could also be a situation where, the big money guys that chase factory racing cars, maybe a week prior, they spent all their money at the Indy cars that sold at Moto Miami.
Well,
I
those
don't
were
know.
pretty amazing.
They were amazing, right? And how many historic race cars can you have on the market at one time, right?
Yeah.
Because it was a stellar car, but also, as you know, 50s cars have been a little soft. You would think a D-type with works history would probably buck that trend a little bit. So I don't know. I just kind of feel like things are retreating right now for a little while. I think if things calm down, however you may describe that, in the next couple of months, like ARM doesn't have another official auction until Monterey. We'll have some stuff, little stuff in between, I'm sure. Yeah, so it's interesting time frame right now. Mecum is happening right now out in your area there, Paul, in Glendale. That's interesting because I would call that there's no really significant cars being sold. It's mostly what I would call fun enthusiast cars. These are the cars that everybody can enjoy. They might not be pure,
Yep.
they might not be right, but they're fun, cool cars.
Oh, they've
Um,
been calling me for sure.
oh, I
So,
bet, right?
yeah. Yeah, I mean,
And
it's definitely the cars that we have, but yeah.
so I'm just gonna comment on three things real quick. One truck I want to keep my eye on because I've seen this thing pop around quite a bit. Again, a next generation 1990 Chevrolet 454 SS pickup. If you've never seen this before, it's the one that was the SS high performance pickup truck back in 1990, black with red interior. But I'm interested in this car because it's in the wrapper with 12 miles on it. It's what you would consider a future not a blue chip, but a future next gen collectible. And then when I saw it, I was like, what? There's a 2024 GMC Hummer EV. So, but it has the Bandit package on it. It has the Smokey and the Bandit package on a Hummer EV. So, anyways, that was just a what. But I did want to call out. I think it's a good place to maybe buy Porsches, Paul. I
Yeah,
always say,
possibly. No, what's interesting is in the last month, we've probably had more people call us to sell their toys that they bought within the last 24 months than probably the last year combined.
Okay, we're gonna
wow,
have her there. We're gonna have her there because you guys realize we're all saying the same thing.
Hmm.
You guys all reading the tea leaves here. Sounds to me like it's going to be a good opportunity to buy cars the second half of this year. Sounds to me like it's going to be a potentially great time. Holy crap, a D type for half off. I can't even imagine that in my head. By the
yeah,
way, Greg, I tried to connect you with, or no, yeah, I did. I tried to connect you
yeah,
with my friend Jeremy. He's got a D type and a C type, and
yeah.
he's in Paul's backyard. You know this guy.
Jeremy?
Jeremy, I'm not going to say his last name. He's
Oh, I think I
restoring
know.
a C type and a D type. Nicest guy you've ever met.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Greg, going back to you said like the AMG, and I think, I understand a little bit why auction houses put a reserve, an estimate range. Um, I don't agree with it because I find often that the estimates, and correct me because I'm probably wrong, but the estimates for reserve auctions seem to, at best, hammer or with fees sell for the low estimate, like just squeak by the low estimate. And then no reserve auctions tend to do somewhere in the middle. And I think with that AMG Hammer car, I think the problem was they were so aggressive, whether it was misunderstanding the market, someone handling that car who didn't really understand what it was, trying to comp it against other things, that I think if that was an estimate of, say, 850 to maybe 990 or something, right under a million, I think that car should have sold for a little more. I don't agree they're worth that, but I understand why people pay that. And I think 700 was probably, they left 200,000 on the table because I feel like they alienated the best buyers. And the one thing, no matter how much money you have, no one wants to feel like they're the dupe in the room who just, got taken. And it's not a good feeling. It's why when you see cars trounce around from one auction to another, especially on the online auctions, the second, third, fourth time they come around, they keep selling for less and less because everyone's like, I'm not going to be the idiot who falls for that. And I think everyone sort of who knew those cars, knew that. I mean, we were talking about that estimate way before the auction ran, and we knew that they were just smoking crack. And I think everyone who might have thought about bidding, they're like, I'm not even going to bother. I'm not going to be part of that game. And I think someone actually, in the long run, It's not going to be a car you can turn around and sell at Monterey. I think you're going to have to hold that car for some time. But I think that they're going to have a really important car that could, in the next 5 years, be a seven-figure car, but not today.
So,
Yeah, and it's funny.
Sorry.
Uh, Making estimates is kind of, a crystal ball kind of thing, because you're trying to read the market. And I never, like you said it right. If you have a estimate that's too high, you're driving away bidders. And if you have a reserve or not, I try to make it so that I feel like the hammer is going to fall right at mid estimate. I always joke, like, low estimate is what the auction house thinks it will sell for. High estimate is what the consignor thinks it will sell for, And, so it really is a difficult thing. And there's many different reasons. No one's ever asked me to change an estimate at RM. If they have, it's because they knew the car better than me. Like, I'm not a pre-war guy. So if I work up an estimate, they'll ask me to change it a little bit. I did have that dual Gia in Miami where they asked me to raise the estimate because it was such a stellar car by like 50 grand. And it did hammer at the low estimate without fees. So it really is interesting. And, I myself, I would never talk anybody into going no reserve on a high dollar car. I think there's a sweet spot for no reserve cars. And I also think the history you have with that car, if you're in the car for 30 grand and it's worth 50 grand, you should run it no reserve. It just depends on, where are you with the car? Why are you selling the car? A lot of different reasons. Some auctions, you can't get in a car unless it's no reserve. Like Pebble, I think it's the minimum. It has to be over $250,000 to have a reserve. But I would never go to a guy with a $7 million car and say, you need to sell this no reserve. Now, maybe an aggressive low reserve is the play, but I would never recommend a no reserve. You just really, it's quite a thing to do to come up with estimates and reserves appropriately so that it sells well. Because you're right, you can scare people off if it's too high.
We talked about this in the last podcast, right? And my theory was that a lot of times it's you guys having to placate the sellers, because if you're maybe giving them too much of a truth serum as to what the car is worth and they don't like it, and there's a less scrupulous auction down the street that's going to tell them a higher number that the seller wants to hear, then you guys aren't going to get the sale, or you're not going to get the consignment. So, Paul, I know you've got a hard stop, but I want to circle back. You did talk about how much time do you have, by the way? I don't want to run you up against
10 minutes, about 10 minutes.
All right. So I interrupted you. I apologize, but you were about to say something. And I think all the listeners, I know if I were listening, I'd be curious about it. You said you're seeing more people call you right now to sell their cars that have bought within the last 2 years.
Yes.
So can you give some backstory to that, just as much as you feel comfortable sharing? Because that's fascinating, because that could be the start of a macro trend.
Yeah. And really the meat of our business is what I would call enthusiast grade cars. We're selling stuff between 70, 80, 90,000 up to maybe $250,000, quasi collectibles, but really the people buying them are enthusiasts. They want to enjoy these cars. They're not hoping to make money. They're always hoping to break even. And I always tell them the same thing. It's going to only last, like, you got to keep this car more than a year or two. I think what's happening, and they all give me different, when I ask them, like, you've only had this car for 18 months or 12 months. Why sell it now? They all have legitimate reasons, but I've listened to reasons on over 5,000 cars we've dealt with, and honestly, I just call bullshit. What I really think it is it's not even about the money. It's just confidence in the market. I see the stock market sway things, and people used to say, "Oh, the stock market, flutters or dives or bombs, then people are going to move to cars." Maybe not in my world. I think what they think is they look around, and even though they're financially okay, there's this sort of guilt to buying a luxury good or keeping a luxury good, and they look at whatever sort of last in first out. They're just like, I just bought that 18 months ago. I was on a high from whatever. The market was better 18 months ago. And now what am I doing with it? And then they come to me and they go, I just want to break even. And, the interesting thing is, and it's not just me, a guy called me yesterday with a 2021 Turbo S, and he bought it. It's higher miles for that car. It's 18,000 miles. He bought it a year ago or 9 months ago from a Porsche dealer CPO. I want to say it was 230. And my first thought was like, well, go back to the Porsche dealer, see what they're actually going to give you. And what I noticed is typically on a late model car, you look at the wholesale number, or like what I would do, here's the range for consignment, and a dealer wholesale buy is maybe on a car like that, a $200,000 car, maybe it's like $5,000-$6,000 less than what the low net would be from me. Now that number is getting huge because the dealers are getting nervous about carrying that inventory.
Okay, you're gonna have to explain that. Talk to me like a 5-year-old. What you just said.
All right, so so we used to
Mommy
be,
loves daddy.
yeah. So when you and this really I think is impactful on 10-year-old and newer cars. So stuff that's maybe 2015, 17 and newer. We're a franchise dealer, Ferrari, Porsche, whatever. I deal mostly with Porsches. Would want to buy the car because they could sell that inventory. They could certify pre-own it, they could put a warranty on it, and they can move it out, and the margin will be decent. So let's say a $200,000 car. Let's say this car will retail for $215,000, and I might say, okay, now it used to be here's the range it'll sell for, 210 to 215. Even in my world, I'm like, that 210 to 2, that $5,000 delta between low and high, I've probably moved it to 200 to 215. I've moved it to, double, triple the percentage of the range of what I thought it would sell for. I said, okay, if it sells for 200, you're going to net this. If we hit a home run and sell it for 215, you're going to net this. Typically, if you went to the dealer, let's say 200,000, the client's going to net somewhere in the low 180s. That would be their low estimate net. And if we hit a home run, maybe they're going to net closer to 200. Typically, the Porsche dealer they're going to offer 175. So they have to decide, hey, is it worth a 30-day risk to probably get 5 or 6 grand more, maybe get 15 grand more? Well, now I'm seeing the Porsche dealers in a lot of cases, instead of a 175 offer, they're going to be down in like 165. Their range is going to be much bigger because they're ready to pull the plug and throw it at a wholesale auction if they don't have to. They don't want to get stuck with it. Especially some of these dealers are paying these flooring costs where the interest rates are super aggressive once you've met the term of a 30, 60-day term. So what I'm seeing is this overwhelming caution from dealers because the market's so volatile. And then you've got sellers going, hey, I don't know. I don't like what's happening in the stock market. I'm getting a little nervous. I've got like 10 cars. I don't know why I bought these 2 cars recently. I don't even use them. They're not what I thought they were. Various reasons. And all of a sudden they're coming to me to dump it. So now you've got the classic economic equation. Supply is going up, unlike the housing market, and demand is going down. And I look at it physically, like how many cars and what's the range of how long they're taking to sell. And now there's always anomalies. If there is a car that, like we've talked about before, that checks all the boxes, it is a one of one in a good way. Rare color, perfect car, whatever. STs, for instance, or even if you go 997.2 GT3 RSs in a rare color, they're always going to be strong. But then when you look at, a client called me yesterday with a 997.1 GT3 RS in white with 40,000 miles. A driver, great car. And I was showing him if his car had under 15,000 miles, it would probably be a 250 car. But because of his miles and the car is great and nicely optioned, and it's not a great color, it's just white, it's probably going to be closer to 200. And that's because the number of buyers who want his car are very few. And that's what I see happening in the market.
So it's just oversaturation, basically, or you're saying it's a sense of oversaturation, too much for sale, obviously oversupply, or maybe becoming oversupply, and also people lacking confidence in the economy. That's what you're sensing. Interesting.
I would say
Greg,
lacking confidence is the big part.
Yeah, I think so. It's true. It is funny too. Real estate's still appreciating too. So real estate's doing great. It's going to appreciate probably, each market's different, but I would say 5 to 6% per year this year nationally. Local markets might be a hell of a lot more. Greg, are you sensing anything like that? Any consternation in the meat and potatoes auction market? Are you seeing and feeling anybody that's maybe pulling back? Because what you guys are telling me, what I'm thinking from an enthusiast perspective is by the way, that Ferrari behind you is so pretty. I can't stop staring at it. That's so gorgeous. Yeah, I mean, maybe the better time to buy is going to indeed be the second half of the year. Maybe that's what we're going to see. The market's going to take that long to sort itself out. Because, Greg, you were talking about auction results, and I am being sensitive to time, Paul. And you and I were talking about the Broad Arrow auction, but also the Gooding auction. I think after the Gooding auction, there were 130 no sales, or
I
130
don't think
cars that were.
that's right.
I mean,
For Gooding?
y- I could be wrong. I was just the number of cars that seem to be transacting right now, and nobody's talking about it, seems to be on the decline, which will create an interesting buying opportunity for the second half of the year, especially if interest rates go down. And again, this all goes back, in my humble opinion, to the fact that people are to Paul's points, but also they're freaking out about affordability of things. Really, that's the essence of it. If you feel real estate rich and your stock market portfolio is going up, you're not buying one car at the RM auction from Greg. You're buying five. That kind of thing. And I do feel that that is not in the marketplace right now. To your guys' point.
Yeah, I don't think it's pulling back. I think we'll still have the events. I think it'll be interesting to see the sell-through rate. Interesting to see, if you're watching an auction live, does the reserve get lowered on the auction block as it's happening? Because people want to sell their cars, and people are being more realistic as far as their prices, because it has been quite a run up for such a long time. It will be interesting to see, like Christie's just bought Gooding, so I think it's called Gooding Christie's now. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think they'll add any to the calendar for 2025, but they bought them as an investment. So there's going to be more than just 2 or 3 auctions a year. And I'm curious to see where they pop up, to see if they're obviously they'll be at Monterey, but if they're at other places in conjunction, some new stuff happening. So there'll be another player expanding its reach in the auction world. But I would assume that's going to be 2026, honestly.
I'm curious, the listeners and the viewers, what do you guys, are you pining away for any particular cars? What is it that you're waiting to buy? What is it that you're anticipating happening in the car market? What does it feel like in your little local hamlet? Are you watching values? Do you care about values? Let us know. I mean, these guys are primarily in the car business. That's how they pay their bills. And so the conversation, meanders in that direction, but it does have a direct bearing. It is kind of fascinating. You could have all the enthusiasm in the world for some car. Well, damn, what did I just read? The new C8, there's 5,000 unsold Corvette C8 sitting on dealer lots right now. 5,000. So if you have a Corvette, you might love it, think it's the greatest thing ever. But if you're fearful that the value is going to plummet, maybe you're not liking it as much. Maybe you're feeling it's a little bit of an anchor. So listeners, what are you guys thinking? Greg, I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I would love to ask the listeners, to answer my question. If they're anonymous, if they have a car that they bought within the last 2 years and they sold it recently, not because you're paying for your kids' college or your wife's remodeling the kitchen or whatever it is, like if they could actually be honest and tell us why they're really selling it, and they can leave their name out, everything. I would love to see a grouping of people to be honest with what they feel. Are we right? Is it just a lack of confidence, or is it actually that their life has changed and just coincidentally they bought a car 2 years ago, regardless of the market, and they can't keep it? So I asked the question back to our audience, be honest. If you've sold something within 2 years, why did you really sell it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's perfect. And so you should pose your questions. Go to Full Throttle Talk over on Instagram and direct message us there. And remember to follow these guys. These guys have their own podcasts. And, Greg's got Collector Car Podcast. That's how he and I originally met. Paul's got an amazing Instagram feed. And make sure you're going to the Auto Kennel. He's, Paul does probably the best job writing car descriptions I've ever read in my life. They're each of them, like normal car descriptions are so horrible, but Paul dives deep and gets into the history of them. Greg, I'm going to ask you this, but I won't ask you to, commit to anything. Greg loves it when I ask him questions he's not prepared for. If you haven't noticed that, Paul, he hates it. But I was telling Paul about your background, prior to basically working as an auction rep, and he and I think that would be an amazing story to share to all the listeners, because so many people are so interested in going from whatever the heck that they're doing in their job and to transitioning into something that they actually have passion for. And you're doing that. And then that might be a great story to share on the next podcast. What do you think?
Anytime.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
It's a crazy story. It's a crazy story.
It is a
none
crazy story.
None of us grew up going, man, I want to be a used car salesperson.
Is that what I am now?
I am.
Rob Meyer will say that, I'm just a used car salesman. I'm like,
I went
yeah, sure.
when my dad was printing our business cards. I really wanted to say used car salesman, like politically incorrect, just that, and just hand it out to people. He wouldn't do it, but I'm going to do it one of these days.
You should do it. Can you imagine the reactions you get at all
That'd be
the
great.
hoi polloi car events?
Yeah,
Like,
used car
laugh their asses
salesman.
off. You should totally do that. In this era where everyone's BSing with their, like in the real estate business, nobody wants to say they're the salesperson. You find me an agent's name or business card with a salesman on the business card. They always have these other fancy ways of trying to avoid the fact that they're in sales. This is kind of funny.
Exactly.
It's especially funny when you consider the highest paid people in the history of forever have always been salespeople. There's no exceptions to that. If you're going to be good at anything in life, you have to learn how to sell, whether you're a doctor, a car salesman, or a roofer. If you don't know how to sell, you're not going to make any money. Well, in any event, that's an interesting place to end today's show. So guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting us. Do ask us questions. We obviously love answering them. And if you've got any suggestions and show topics, more of this, less of that, we're open to anything you guys have to contribute. In the meantime, have a fantastic day. And thank you for listening or watching to Full Throttle Talk.